saying that your shoestring could be considered a machine gun, is no longer with ATF?
Well, he's no longer with FTB and no longer with ATF according to their front office. Now, that's funny you bring that up because in two court cases, I've been able to witness what a jury does when the infamous shoestring letter is introduced. They all stare at their shoes, wondering if they're going to be charged for a crime when they walk out of the courtroom. And less than 7 days after Quan was acquitted on the machine gun charge, the ATF spontaneously wrote another shoestring letter, now declaring a shoestring is no longer a machine gun.
Oh, okay, that's good. How about popsicle sticks?
Zip ties failing. Oh, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And my eyes have been opened up. When I got into this, the first case, of course, was Johnny Glover. And if anybody wants to see how crazy that was, all they need to do is get BATFE fails the test from you, because that's raw, uncut footage. Sometimes I'm holding the camera. Forgive me for shaking. And sometimes Mr. Glover was holding the camera. And you see the ATF using special ammunition. Only the ammunition that the ATF brought to that test had the accidental malfunction. And it had soft primers.
If people want to see some of that testing, if we can use that word, we have that within the film The Gang. And I think it's fascinating when the fellow who was doing the testing acknowledged he never even took the gun apart before he decided it was a machine gun. Amazing things. Well, why don't we move on? You wanted to talk about, I think, some of the comments that the judge had to say?
Oh, certainly.
In the Quan case?
Judge Zille, out in the Ninth Circuit in Seattle, was a pretty sharp guy. In a post-trial motion, Judge Zille, and I'm gonna quote him here because this goes right to the heart of the matter. And he said, "No one may be required at the peril of life, liberty, or property to speculate as to the meaning of penal statutes." Now, Judge Zille was quoting the United States Supreme Court, and specifically the case of Lanzetta v. New Jersey. Now, if we were to go back and visit that just for a second, let me break this down for you, Aaron. The Supreme Court has told all law enforcement in the United States, look, you can't require anybody at the peril of life, liberty, or property to speculate as to what in the heck you're trying to enforce. Obviously, the ATF is ignoring the Supreme Court. Now, there's quite a few other cases that say the same thing, and Judge Zille hit upon them in this order. But one of them was vagueness may invalidate a criminal law for either of two independent reasons. First, it may fail to provide the kind of notice that would enable ordinary people to understand what conduct it prohibits. Second, it may authorize and even encourage arbitrary and discriminatory enforcement. This case was the City of Chicago v. Morales. Now, vagueness. Let's see. Let's lay this template over the ATF. The ATF doesn't have any written testing standards. So if you wanted to conform your conduct to the law, you can't look up and say, all right, let me test my rifle to make sure that it conforms with the law. It doesn't exist. And not only that, it could change because it's not written. So that part of the template's been met. All right. Now, it may fail to provide the kind of notice that will enable ordinary citizens to understand what conduct it prohibits. Second, it may authorize and even encourage arbitrary and discriminatory enforcement. How many times have we heard the ATF called arbitrary? Certainly, the vagueness of some of the gun laws have encouraged the ATF to do just that. And this rush to get these big cases and the big headlines and the prosecution numbers up so that they can go to Congress and get my tax money and your tax money and everybody else listening, they're willing to do whatever it takes to get that conviction. And if that means leaning on an expert witness or two to keep their mouth shut, history has shown that they're willing to do that. If it means fudging the evidence a little bit, well, it's not a machine gun, but I'll make it one, and then I'll testify to everybody that it's readily restorable. They certainly did that in Quan. Obviously, the ATF thinks that they're outside the authority of the United States Supreme Court.
In fact, in the gang, we show some examples of how they create their own machine guns using J.B. Weld and some other things that they do. We're getting towards the end. Would you like to talk about an article you published on our website at jpfo.org called "Am I an Enemy of the United States?" and how the ATF reacted to that?
I sure would. The day that was published, the very next morning at 7:30 a.m., I got a knock on the door. 2 special agents. And to say that I was scared would probably be an understatement. They were gentlemen, but nonetheless, the message was clear. Quit speaking out. They showed up, and they were investigating something that Sterling Nixon had sent them down to investigate, having to do with a situation that I had contacted Mr. Nixon over 18 months prior. And I found it more than a little coincidental. And just 3 weeks prior to that, before that had happened, I had sent a fax to the acting ATF director, Mike Sullivan, Maximum Mike, basically complaining about his lack of communication. I have attempted to contact Mr. Sullivan since he's been acting director, who was specially placed there by Alberto Gonzalez, rubber-stamped by our president, and is now facing confirmation. And in this fax letter, I'm complaining about the ATF's lack of communication. Well, Mr. Sullivan decided it was time to communicate, and his way of communicating was to send down a couple of auditors and comb my books for 6 hours looking for mistakes. And that's how we found out that their records were so inept that they actually had special worksheets to try to fix them. Because my records were 100%. Their records were off by 4 machine guns. You'd think they'd want to know where theirs are at.
Fascinating. But, we learned that this is standard procedure for these folks. Well, then we got about a minute or two left. Is there something you'd like to say to wrap up the program with?
Sure. And that is that anybody who speaks out against the ATF gets leaned on. I guess if you're a gun owner or in the gun industry, your First Amendment rights are suspended, because any time I've spoken out, there's been nothing but vindictiveness in return. And what saved my butt is documentation. And all I can tell everybody out there that if you have any contact with the ATF, document, document, document. The ATF has gone after firearms manufacturers. Lately, that's not been working too well for them. And they've been going after dealers. And Ryan showing us how to handle that. That's not working too well for them. All of you curio and relic holders, beware. You're next.
And by all means, please let JPFO know.
Most certainly.
So we can help people document and document and document. And don't forget your video camera. Len, I want to thank you very much for being with us today. This has been Talking to America. Our special guest has been Len Savage. And please remember, if you won't defend your rights, don't complain when you lose them.
Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of JPFO.org or its members. Talkin' to America is a production of JPFO.org.